Today we're installing vinyl plank flooring, this time in the bathroom.
Now we have a small bathroom on our first floor that needs a serious remodel. And today I'm attacking the flooring and replacing this boring beige ceramic tile with a vinyl plank flooring that looks just like large format tile. I started by taking out the toilet, and a great way to get those last bits of water out is with a turkey baster from the dollar store. I also removed the mirror and the vanity since I'll be building a new vanity for the remodel. But if you're keeping your vanity, there's no need to remove it for flooring install. Now the vinyl plank tile is a floating floor, so it needs expansion gaps and trim installed to hide them. So I went ahead and pulled out all the trim as well for a nice clean slate. Now before you start busting up any flooring, it's a good idea to plug up the air vents with some towels so you don't get dust and debris all in there.
All right, I got started on the floor and apparently I was not recording. So I have taken up this so far. This is coming up way easier than it should because this was not properly installed. Let me keep going here and I'll show you how easily it's coming up.
Now, this flooring install was on top of an OSB subfloor, and I was able to use a combination of a small pry bar and a large demo bar to get between the subfloor and that orange underlayment to pry up the tiles. Now some spots were actually held down pretty good, and they put up a fight. But every floor is going to be different, and this could be really easy for you, or a huge pain in the butt. And when you get near the toilet flange, go ahead and slow down and take your time. The last thing you need to do is go all Hulk smash on it and bust up your flange, or worse yet, snap your water supply line. Now same goes for around the tub, as you don't want to damage the tub by slamming into it with a pry bar. But I worked my way around the room, and then I vacuumed up all the debris to see what I was left with.
We've got all the ceramic tile out and now we can see the subfloor, see what we're working with. So the big thing that you want to be considered with, you want to make sure that it is in good condition and flat. So I've got a level here. I'm going to check to see how we're looking. It's pretty good here, but what I notice is coming right over to the tub. This is on a seam in between the subfloor. We've got a lot of rocking, so I'm gonna have to deal with that. It's a hump right here. I'm gonna get the belt sander and put that down to get a good base before we get started.
And I decided to go with a scraper before the belt sander to get off the mastic from the subfloor. And it comes up pretty easy in some spots, but others I had to really put some elbow grease into it. Now you could use a floor grinder or other power tools to do this, but a good 30 minutes of manual labor never hurt anybody. Actually, that's not true. I was hurting pretty bad the next day. I sucked up all the mastic and I checked for level, but I saw that the seams were still proud. Now, this is a pretty common occurrence with wood subfloors, so don't be surprised to see it. I took the belt sander to the seams and I tried to level them out the best I could. I also went around and found any nails that were sticking up and hammered those beneath the surface with a nail set, and then I was ready to check the floor.
All right, after all the sanding, the rocking is gone, so the level works here, but they run into another issue that you're definitely going to want to consider before you start laying anything down, and that's with the toilet flange. Let's take a look.
The toilet flange was about a ½ inch too high for the vinyl planks and the plywood underlayment I'm using. Now, if the flange isn't flush or slightly proud, then you can get a rocking toilet and leaks. Now, I'd recommend having a plumber move the flange for you if you're weary about it, because it's not a trivial job. But another option would be to build up the floor with a thicker underlayment, but we wanted the floor to be flush with the hardwood in the hallway. Now, before putting it in, I cleared up the side of the bathtub and laid down a new bead of silicone caulk to stop any water from getting under the tub. I'm using 5mm plywood underlayment to go on top of the subfloor. Now this will give a nice smooth surface for the vinyl tiles, and it'll also raise up the floor to be level with that toilet flange. The plywood gets secured to the ground with staples, a lot of staples. After securing one corner, I came across the sheet diagonally. Now this helps get good contact in the center of the sheet, and then you can work your way outward to avoid humps. But the recommendation is to go every 2 inches along the exterior and every 4 inches on the interior. Bump fire mode on my air stapler really kept me sane, and to the future person who rips this up, sorry. Have fun with those staples. And I used an 1/8 inch spacer between the plywood and tub, and I removed it and filled that gap with more silicone caulk after I was done. And now the tile will sit almost exactly flush with that toilet flange, which is just what I was looking for.
Let's take a look at the vinyl tile I'm going to be using. This is a luxury vinyl plank flooring. It's got a barrier on the background to help with sound dampening, and you don't need a rollout underlayment for this one because it's already attached. So I have done a lot that look like hardwood in the past, but this is supposed to look like large format tile, like ceramic. And this has got a cool slate look. And when you put some of these together on the ground and butt them together, there's actually a faux grout line. So it really does look a lot like tile. So this is a cool new product. I'll have a link down below in the description to this, as well as all the tools that I use to do this project.
Next, I jumped into layout. Now you can lay out your tiles in the room and take measurements to calculate offsets and minimize small pieces during install. But I prefer a more tech-savvy approach. I used a 3D modeling program to draw the room to an exact dimension and added in tiles in a brick pattern. And I saw that 5 rows would fit almost perfectly in it. Then I put dimensions on the first and last tile of a row, and I moved the entire floor from right to left to get an even match at the start and end of a row. And if you wanted to go a little step further, which of course I did, you can add in the pipes and vents to play around with them as well. Now you may think this is overkill, but I love it. Now installing the first row can be tricky if your wall isn't straight. I snapped a chalk line at a right angle to the tub, 5 inches off the wall, using a carpenter square as a reference. Now using that line, I could see that the wall tapered out a ½ inch at the far end, and I marked other points along the way as well. I cut the first tile to length using my layout drawing. I'm using a tile cutter here for a clean edge, but you can cut the tiles many other ways, like I outlined in my 6 ways to cut vinyl flooring video. Now then I could use the points that I measured to make the taper or the scribe on the plank. Now since the far side was a ½ inch out, I had to take a ½ inch off the first board to allow for a full plank at that far end. I made the cut with my jigsaw, and then I brought the piece back to the bathroom to cut a hole for the water supply. Now make sure to factor in the 1/4 inch expansion gap when you take these measurements. I used some scraps from the underlayment taped to the wall as spacers for this. I drilled the spot for the water supply line using a spade bit, and then I turned off my water and I took off the shutoff valves so that I could slip the piece over the pipe and make that hole as small as possible. Now, I bought an extra toilet flange, and it turned out to be the perfect reference to trace for the cutout. I went back to my shop and I cut the curve out with a jigsaw. The jigsaw is definitely the most versatile tool for vinyl flooring installs. And the piece fit in perfectly, and you'll notice I put another 1/8 inch spacer against the tub since I'll be caulking that seam at the end. Now this looks like a lot of work up front, but getting the first row right is super important, and it sets the stage for the rest of the install. I had to repeat the same process for the next 2 planks in the first row. If your vinyl flooring has repeating patterns, it's a good idea to lay them out in stacks of the same styles. This way you can make sure to mix it up and keep similar tiles separated. Now to speed things up, I set up the tile cutter right outside the bathroom to cut my beginning and ending tiles. I cut a small piece that would hit exactly in the center of the tile of the first row, and I put that one in place to start the second row. Then I used a full-size piece and laid out the other half of the notch for the toilet flange. I went to the shop and I cut the curve out again with the jigsaw, and then I was ready to start locking things in place.
All right, we've got the first row in, and you'll notice I didn't tap anything together, and that's because I want to do this on the second row. So I've got the small piece in, and now this piece that spans over the toilet flange, I need that because I couldn't line up the straight edge across the toilet flange. So I couldn't really tell, because we're missing the corners on both of these, I couldn't really tell if it was even. So now I'm gonna tap these into place and then start locking everything together. And then as I have this as a full unit, now we'll be able to really line it up and get it in good. So I'm gonna tap these together now and seal those seams, and I'm gonna use a combination of a soft mallet and also a tapping block for going up against it. So these are both great tools to have for your installation, and you'll see I'll have a little cheater pull bar that we'll use later on the ends as well.
I tapped the seams together with the mallet, locking them together. And then I could push the second row firmly into that first row with the tapping block. Now you'll notice here that the spacers that I had taped to the wall started falling off and flipping over. The tape I was using was not the greatest, so I grabbed a stronger roll and I taped them back in place before putting in that last piece.
All right, for that last piece of the row, I'm gonna be able to take the offcut that was from the beginning of the row. So I can still have just 3 tiles per row in my way, but for your bathroom, if it's larger, just keep your offcuts and you can finish the row with one of your offcuts.
For the last piece in the row, I pulled out the pull bar or cheater bar that I mentioned before. It lets you get over to the end of the tile and pull it tight into the rest of the row. A great way to keep the tiles from sliding when tapping up against that first row is to have somebody stand on the tiles to hold them in place. But for heaven's sake, don't tell your spouse that you need something heavy to hold down the tiles. Just ask them to come over and model their flip-flops for you. But if you're flying solo, then some heavy buckets or weights can work as a good stand-in as well. I continued down the third row, securing the tiles into the previous row and tapping them tight, and then locking in the short side. The last piece in the third row hit the air vent in the room. And since I could lay the tile in place right over the vent, it was really easy to mark for the width of the cut. Then I just measured how far up to make the opening, and I drew it on the tile. I used the jigsaw again for this cut, and I made the long side notches first. Then I made a curved pass to get to the top of that notch, and then I finished up the cut with another sweep back to the corner of my layout lines. I brought it back and it fit in perfect, and I moved on to the fourth row. And as I got further into the room, I could more comfortably step onto the rows that I'd already installed when I was tapping the current one in place. This helps keep things steady even more, and the more tiles that you install, the more the floor is going to resist moving. I laid out the final piece to notch around the air vent, and here you can see where the planning really came into play. I used my drawing to make sure that the tile ended right at the air vent, and this made the cuts a lot cleaner and gives the tiles more support. So if you can factor in air vents like this in your install, then it's going to make it a lot easier. The last row needs to get cut to width and scribed just like the first row. And you want to leave a 1/4 inch gap at the wall for an expansion joint as well here. I cut that first piece to length, and then I measured for the scribing cuts. And after a little work with the jigsaw, I had a piece ready to go. Now you'll have to use the cheater bar to pull it tight into the rest of the tiles here, because you don't have any room for that tapping block. It's just like we used it on the end of the rows for the other boards.
We're getting into these pieces around the door, and ending an install at a doorway is not great. You have several things you need to work around. First of all, we're going to have a transition strip that's going to be in the doorway, so there's going to be a piece for the T-molding that I need to install and work around. Secondly, we've got this door trim, and it shouldn't be a big deal if it was on the other side of the wall, but because it's on this side, I have to go under it because I can't knife into it. But basically, I'm going to have to do the tapering and install the transition before I install these pieces. So I'm going to put that transition in, and then we'll measure around it, and I'll show you how this goes in under the door trim.
I have a 28-inch door going into the bathroom, and the transition strip I'm using is a T-mold that's sold in 72-inch lengths. It's got two parts to it: the metal C-channel that gets fastened to the floor, and then the T-molding, which is a piece of vinyl that snaps into it. I measured a length that was a 1/2 inch smaller than the door opening and cut down the C-channel with some tin snips. You can also use a hacksaw to cut this, or even a Dremel tool. When you're positioning the transition, you want to think about where it's going to hit on the floor and if it's going to show or not when the door is closed. Now my hardwood stops right where the face of the door will be sitting, so I position the C-channel so that I can get that transition as close to that hardwood as possible and not go further out into the hallway. I secured it with the included screws, and now I could take the measurements to scribe in those last two pieces. Now these pieces will have a little step cut in them where the door opening sticks out further than the wall does. I went back into the shop with a jigsaw and I cut the piece to fit. And you can see here why I couldn't just tilt it into place since it would hit the door trim. And so instead, what you can do is loosely lock in the tongue and groove lip along that long edge of the tile just past the door trim. And then use the tapping block to scoot the tile under the trim and all the way down that row until you hit the first tile. You may need to lift up on the end of the tile so that you can get it to lock in, but after a little bit of mallet work, it'll fit in like a champ, and then you can hit the rest of those joints and use that cheater bar. And I took the measurements on the final piece and I cut that one to size as well. I tried the same trick on this one, but since I didn't have open space to the left, I couldn't really lock in the whole long edge. But after a bit of finagling, I was able to get it locked in for a little bit of the piece, but if you're having issues getting that done, another option is to cut away the locking tongue on that board that you're installing. Then what you can do is run a small bead of silicone on the groove of the tiles in that previous row, and then lock it in that way, and it'll hold tight. I went ahead and cut the transition to finish off this area. I used my miter saw first, but it gave me some chip out there on that vinyl sticker, so I went ahead and used the old-fashioned route with a handsaw, and that turned out great. Now the transition pops right into that C-channel. Now also, this is not the right transition. It is a bit darker than the floor. I had to special order the one for this one because it wasn't available at my local store. It'll be here soon. Now with the floor installed, I could go back to the tub and run a bead of silicone caulk into that 1/8 inch gap that I'd left. Now we found some grout colored silicone that matched pretty well, and it looks much better than a white or a clear wood. I put those taller baseboards in that I was talking about to finish the install, and it was looking really great. This large tile vinyl plank flooring came out looking way better than I thought it would, honestly. The faux grout lines really make it look nice. The tile and the seams are waterproof, but this is a floating floor, so the edges not caulked could get some water underneath them if the room does flood. But in the 18 years of being a homeowner, that's never happened, so we feel pretty good about it. Knock on wood.
If you want to see the rest of this small bathroom renovation, I'll have it queued up right here for you. And if you want to see some more vinyl plank videos, I've got them down there and you can check them out. I want to give a big thank you to all the folks that have been joining the Builders Club and the memberships. You can see that down below. And I'll catch you guys over on the next video.